Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
On Tuesday's pod, we talked about Mitch McConnell trying to have it both ways on impeachment by voting to acquit Donald Trump and then tearing him a new asshole in a speech on the Senate floor. In a stunning turn of events that literally everyone could have expected, the former president objected to the minority leader's remarks in a 600-word statement that read in part, quote, "Mitch is a dour, sullen, and unsmiling political hack who will never do what's right for our country." No arguments there.
Literally the most truthful thing he's ever said.
Ever said. Total agreement with Donald Trump. According to Politico, Dan, that was the toned-down version of the letter. The original apparently mocked McConnell for having multiple chins because self-awareness is Trump's strong suit. He ended by threatening to, quote, back primary rivals who are MAGA loyalists in midterm elections. So, Mitch versus MAGA, who you rooting for?
No one? Everyone to lose?
That is probably correct. What do you think, though? Who should we be rooting for here?
Well, I want someone to release the Zack Snyder cut version of the Trump statement. Put it out there, someone. Leak it. I don't know. I hate Mitch McConnell. I hate Trump. In their current position right now, Mitch McConnell is much more dangerous than Trump in the sense that he can do things other than call into Fox News and OAN.
Yeah.
I have found the coverage of Mitch McConnell's speech to be infuriating. There's actually a pretty good New York Times story today which points out how Mitch McConnell has got himself in a bit of a pickle here by trying to have it both ways and ending up with neither way. But the thing that bothered me about the coverage, which is why I find it strange if my reaction to something happening is the same as Trump's, like that causes some amount of self-reflection. But and all the coverage of Mitch McConnell's speech and in Mitch McConnell's speech itself, it never wrestles with the fact that he himself promoted that big lie for well over a month. And so the question, I guess, comes down to if they are going to have a fight of sorts, whether it's a battle for the soulless center of the Republican Party or something else, who should we root for? And I don't really know the answer to that. I don't know. What do you think?
I will say, just narrowly considering primaries in 2022, I certainly don't want to promote, nor will I, more Trumpy candidates. But I do think that in many cases, if a Trump-backed candidate who's fucking cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs wins a primary, we will have a better chance of defeating that candidate than we will a Mitch McConnell-backed, more establishment Republican.
What if it's the opposite?
I think it's only the opposite. I mean, it depends on the state, right? Like, I don't think a completely Trumpy candidate in Pennsylvania necessarily has a better chance in a primary than another Pat Toomey, who's really conservative but not as Trumpy. I mean, it depends on the candidate, right? Like, if it's a candidate, it's labeling a candidate Trumpy is also tough too, because there's a million different ways to be Trumpy, right? Like, you could see someone with Trump's faux populist appeal doing well. You could also see, like, I don't think Marjorie Taylor Greene wins a statewide race in Pennsylvania. I don't think she wins a statewide race in Georgia either.
No, I agree with that.
Or if she could win a statewide race in Georgia if there was a really weak Democratic candidate. But if you told me on the Democratic side, would you rather face in Georgia Marjorie Taylor Greene or David Perdue again, I would say Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there's probably a special exception for QAnon conspiracy believing people who were kicked off their committees. But there is an interesting question of if Trumpy is like right-wing appeal to Fox News, Hannity, and McConnell is Paul Ryan policies, establishment-backed Chamber of Commerce Republican, in a election determined by turnout, it's not to me a given that the McConnell candidate will be better. than the Trump candidate. It's possible that it'd be the opposite. And I think, like, you're right. It's going to depend on who that person is. Is it Marjorie Taylor Greene, or is it Doug Collins, or is it something else? But
yeah,
I think the question here is Mitch McConnell being in that job, we should also note that for this giant battle for whatever the Republican Party, the McConnell people have basically said he's not engaging anymore. Yeah. He said he gave one speech and he's like, I got this covered and he moved on. So I don't know what kind of battle this is going to be. And we'll see if he actually does the work. Right. But all this time we hear like, God, we need people like John Boehner or Paul Ryan to be in their position, or Mitch McConnell to be in their positions of power to serve as some sort of bulwark against Trumpism, the Tea Party, MAGA, and all of that turns out to be complete and utter bullshit. Mitch McConnell was in his job, and Trump incited a violent insurrection that almost murdered all of Mitch McConnell's colleagues. And so I'm not sure that we are that much better off, or it makes any bit of difference whether it's McConnell or Lindsey Graham who is in charge of the Senate. I think it's the same thing in the end of the day because of where the locus of power is in the party.
Well, and that goes to my point about who do you want to win a primary, right? Because normally you'd say, well, it's dangerous to elevate the Trumpy candidate because, look, we all did that to Trump in 2016 and then Trump won, right? But I don't think that the country necessarily is better off when establishment Republicans win primaries or even win general elections at this point because they don't do much of defending the fucking country from Trumpism, you know? I mean, it's also like some of these are like, distinctions without a difference. Like, think about the Madison Cawthorn race. Remember when Madison Cawthorn won his primary? He was not backed by Donald Trump. The Trumpy candidate lost. And then Madison Cawthorn was like invited on fucking Morning Joe. And everyone was like, oh, young star of the Republican Party beat the Trumpy candidate in the primary. And it turns out that Madison Cawthorn is just as fucking Trumpy as the rest of them and like showed up at the Stop the Steal rally.
Yeah. Dan Crenshaw, same situation.
Same thing.
Yeah.
So it's like Mitch McConnell candidates aren't necessarily like, they're not like Ben Sass and Mitt Romney. I know. I'm not trying to say that they're wonderful.
I'm not going to react strongly.
I have to be careful around you. But they're not like that necessarily. They could still be pretty Trumpy candidates. So I'm still looking for the candidate that we have the best chance of defeating, which is usually the less extreme candidate.
Yes, that's what all the political science research shows.
Even to this day, even with Trump winning in 2016, it still shows that. So McConnell's MAGA problems go beyond Trump himself. Lindsey Graham said that if Mitch doesn't understand that Republicans need Donald Trump to take back the majority, he's just not looking. Ron Johnson said that he doesn't think Mitch speaks for the caucus and that he, quote, needs to be a little careful. Sean Hannity called for McConnell to be replaced as leader, as did a county Republican chairman in Kentucky. Do you think McConnell's job as minority leader is in any serious jeopardy here?
No, I don't, actually. You need someone to. The Senate caucus writ large is not the House caucus. They're on the Republican side. There is not this block of, Freedom Caucus people who actually control the sway. It's a lot of MAGA adjacent institutionalist Republicans who've been there for a while, and the people most likely to sort of seize on this moment and challenge it are Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, two people hated by every other senator. There is not an obvious. It is very, very rare for a Senate leader to be deposed within their own caucus. I'd be curious. People have quit because of scandals like Trent Lott, but I don't know that anyone has been deposed in modern history, at least. And it just seems very hard to imagine that happening in this case, given who the likely challengers are. You need to be popular and well-liked among your colleagues to take down someone like Mitch McConnell, and Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz have spent their lives being neither well-liked nor popular with anyone.
Yeah, and then you have to ask yourself, like, why would all of these Republican senators who are really pissed at Mitch McConnell rally around someone like John Cornyn, who's still not quite Trumpy enough to be beloved by the MAGA base, but is also like doesn't really satisfy the concerns of the rest of the caucus. So it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. Nor does it really, like, if McConnell was replaced by John Cornyn, I think, like, or someone like that, I don't think we'd all be better off necessarily.
Well, I mean, it's the Paul Ryan, Kevin McCarthy example.
Exactly. In fact, we said when our favorite Republican leader Paul Ryan left that Kevin McCarthy would be worse.
No, actually, at least on one important matter, he has been much braver than Paul Ryan, because Paul Ryan made Steve King, avowed white supremacist, chair of the Constitution Subcommittee, and Kevin McCarthy kicked him off all of his committees and basically ejected him from Congress. So it is a small point in Kevin McCarthy's favor.
Okay. You know what? I appreciate your feelings for Paul Ryan. And I appreciate that the grudge is going to be held no matter how long we do this show. That's what I
am still mad about putting a white supremacist on the Constitution Subcommittee.
Yeah, no, it was bad. It was very, very bad. McConnell's people told CNN that his plan is to never utter the name Donald Trump again, which is really funny. This is most certainly not Donald Trump's plan. He broke his longest stretch of silence in 4 years yesterday with a series of friendly interviews where he was clearly distraught about the death of his good friend Rush Limbaugh, to whom he delivered a moving tribute during a call into Fox News' Outnumbered. Let's listen to this compilation that Jordan Ewell put together.
And he was one of the people that said we were going to win. He thought we were going to win. Well, Rush thought we won, and so do I, by the way. I think we won substantially. And Rush thought we won. I was disappointed by voter tabulation. And a lot of other people feel that way, too. But Rush felt that way strongly. And many people do. Many professionals do. I think it's disgraceful what happened. We were like a third world country on election night, with the closing down of the centers and all of the things that happened later. And I don't think that could have happened to a Democrat. You would have had riots going all over the place if that happened to a Democrat. We don't have the same support at certain levels of the Republican system. And he was furious at it. And many people are furious. You don't know how angry this country is. He was somebody that really felt that was a very important victory for us. We should have had it. That we did have it, but he was somebody that felt that was a very important election, and I did too. I did too. You see what's happening now. We played golf together a little bit. He was a very strong guy, physically very strong, hit the ball a long way.
What a tribute. What a tribute to Rush. Remind me to have Donald Trump eulogize me. So I don't want to spend too much more time on Trump. Last question on this. Is there any way for Democrats to exploit this sort of Mitch versus MAGA saga to push more Republicans out of power?
Absolutely. That is the core of politics, is uniting your coalition and dividing the other's coalition. And so finding ways in which to make Mitch McConnell the embodiment of what Trump and MAGA hates about the Republican Party makes it harder for Mitch McConnell to elect people to the Senate, because Trump is not going to be on the ballot in 2022. A large coterie of his children may be on the ballot, but he will not be on the ballot. And so this idea that Mitch McConnell, this hated Republican who betrayed the MAGA movement, who espouses all these policy positions that are universally unpopular, but Donald Trump's kind of sort of ran against 2016, is to Democrats' advantage. The way we are going to win is if the Trump voters who turned out in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Arizona do not turn out in this election. And Trump and Mitch McConnell being in a big fight certainly makes that more likely and possible. And we should find ways to keep that fight going as long as possible and communicating it directly to voters.
Yeah, back to the original question we asked. Root for chaos in the Republican Party. That's what we need to root for. All right, let's talk about the current president. Joe Biden took his first official trip away from the White House on Tuesday. He flew to Milwaukee for a CNN town hall that was totally normal, pretty informative, generally reassuring, even a little boring at times. At one point, the president simply referred to his predecessor as, quote, the former guy. What'd you think? What'd you think of the town hall, how Joe Biden did?
Exactly the way you described it. It was so comfortingly normal. Just a normal president talking to voters about issues.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump was not really a part of it. Obviously he looms large over everything, but it's about helping people deal with the pandemic and get help and student loan debt, which we'll talk about, all these other things. It was just normal. I also think Biden has really found just this great, and he's been this way since the general election really started. It's just this real comfort in knowing what his strategic home bases. Right? He's going to be presidential. He's not going to be overly partisan. He is not going to talk about Trump, and he's just going to focus on uniting people with sort of the macro definition of that, not the appease Lindsey Graham definition of it. And he's just been very, very good, and has found this way to be adhering to the strategic guidance that I'm sure his team has given him, while still being completely and totally authentic and human. And it's not an easy thing to do on national television, for sure.
Or an easy thing to do for Joe Biden. Like, let's be honest, he has spent a lot of his career delivering very sort of undisciplined, loquacious answers to questions.
Yeah.
And he still does that sometimes. He still rambles on a little bit, but he's always catching himself. You can always see that he's editing himself now, that he's trying to be more disciplined, that he's trying to be more strategic in his answers. He was like that during the campaign. I think it's why he ultimately came out ahead in the primary when he was losing badly, and then, of course, did really well in the general election. Like, he has gotten better. And I think we saw that in the town hall. As you mentioned, I think one of the most notable moments came when a listener asked Biden the following question about student debt forgiveness. Let's take a listen.
We need student loan forgiveness beyond the potential $10,000 your administration has proposed. We need at least a $50,000 minimum. What will you do to make that happen?
I will not make that happen. It depends on whether or not you go to a private university or a public university. It depends on the idea that I say to a community, I'm going to forgive the debt, the billions of dollars of debt for people who have gone to Harvard and Yale and Penn and schools. My children, I went to a great school, I went to a state school. But is that going to be forgiven rather than use that money to provide for early education for young children who come from disadvantaged circumstances? But here's what I think. I think everyone, and I've been proposing this for 4 years, everyone should be able to go to community college for free. For free. That costs $9 billion, and we should pay for it. And the tax policies we have now, we should be able to pay for it. You spend almost that much money as a break for people who own racehorses. And I think any family making under $125,000 whose kids go to a state university they get into, that should be free as well.
So this wasn't really new. Biden campaigned on canceling $10,000 worth of student debt. But after the town hall, Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren, who've been part of the progressive push for Biden to cancel $50,000 of debt, released a statement that read, "The Biden administration has said it is reviewing options for canceling up to $50,000 in student debt by executive action, and we are confident that they will agree with the standards Obama and Trump used." The White House responded by saying that Biden doesn't favor forgiving up to $50,000 in student debt, quote, "without limitation," and that they've asked the Justice Department to review whether Biden has the executive authority to cancel that much debt in the first place. So, lot to unpack here, Dan. Do you think Biden is against the $50,000 cancellation because he doesn't want to do it, or because he doesn't think he has the power to do it?
We have to disentangle two questions that I think have become a little sort of aggregated together since the election. During the election, much of the discussion around student debt cancellation was about legislation to do that. Since the election, Elizabeth Warren, Senator Schumer, and others have pushed forward this idea that he has the executive authority to do that is something within his power. During the campaign, Biden was for canceling $10,000, up to $10,000 in student debt. But he did not go as far as others who wanted a much larger number, including eliminating all student debt or canceling up to $50,000. So that is one aspect of it. He has clearly said himself, and he reiterates it. Jen Psaki reiterated town hall, that he is closer to $10,000 than $50,000 in terms of what he feels comfortable from either a policy and or political perspective to do. Then there's another question about whether he has the power to do it, whether it's $10,000, $50,000, $5, whether that is something that that it exists within the president's commonly accepted executive authority. And that is, Warren and Schumer believe he does. There is precedent that suggests that they are correct. But it's also worth remembering that a president only has as much executive power as the Supreme Court says he or she has. And a 5-4 Supreme Court that existed when Barack Obama was president, with Kennedy and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, may have a very different view of how much power a Democratic president has than one with 6-3 court with Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. Jen said, and I thought this was a pretty compelling point, which is they want an opinion from the Department of Justice. They do not yet have an attorney general or a team at the DOJ yet. And once they have that, this would be the Office of Legal Counsel, I believe, which provides legal opinions to the government, what they can and can't do. And so I imagine that they will put that forward when there is someone in place to render that opinion. Last thing I'd say is the opinion on the books right now says the president does not have that. Now, that opinion was written by the attorneys at the Department of Education, who are Betsy DeVos's attorneys. So that is not a binding opinion nor one that we should take particularly seriously, but that is what is currently on the books. And it does make it a little bit harder to go forward until you have a superseding opinion that says you can do it.
The one other wrinkle here is that if you listen to that statement from Schumer and Warren, they said, we're confident that they will agree with the standards Obama and Trump used. So that was referring, I believe, to the fact that both Obama and Trump have used authority to sort of delay student loan payments, cancel some student loan payments. This basically comes down to the Higher Education Act of 1965 and whether you believe it gives the president the authority to cancel debt. There is agreement that that law gives the president some authority to cancel or postpone some student loan payments. There is not agreement whether it gives the president the authority to do a mass cancellation of debt. Is that what you took from it as well?
Yes, that is my understanding. And there's a broader question about whether, and this is in the Department of Education opinion, whether they actually even had the original authority because it's a spending issue, and a spending issue is delegated to Congress. Now,
Correct.
I think this is a bullshit opinion, but this ultimately this is going to end up being before the Supreme Court if you were to proceed forward, just as nearly every executive action of any merit or controversy ends up.
So we should make a point about the politics of these two proposals, which we polled with Change Research last month. 55% of voters supported canceling $10,000 worth of student debt, and 52% supported $50,000 worth of student debt. So both proposals fairly popular, and there's not too much of a difference in support for either proposal. So what are the risks of going with $50,000 in debt over $10,000, and sort of what are the risks of the reverse, going with the $10,000 position over the $50,000 position for Joe Biden?
Well, I think we should just stipulate, and I think you and I agree here, that put the politics aside for a second, this is the right thing to do. We need to deal with the ballooning student debt crisis in this country. 40% of student debt holders did not even graduate from college, so they have the worst of all worlds, which is they have this huge debt and did not get the theoretically higher earning potential that would come with that college degree. As Warren and Schumer point out in their statement, this is a huge opportunity to deal with the racial wealth gap in this country. And so I think it's the right thing to do. I would be for as much as is possible, but we should not pretend it's risk-free in either direction. There is I was thinking about this if you go back to the Rick Santelli CNBC rant that launched the Tea Party and all of that, that was about, the core of that rant was a speech to people who paid their mortgage, who quote unquote bought homes they could afford. There's a lot of bullshit inherent in that point. And now you are being asked as a responsible homeowner who pays your taxes to pay for the mortgages of the people who could not afford their homes, who bought homes they could not afford. This is at the absolute core of conservative messaging going back to Ronald Reagan and welfare queens. It is about sort of trying to appeal to white voters by suggesting your incorrectly and unfairly and divisively suggesting your taxpayers are going to others. And you, just like with the welfare queens examples, and as happened during Obama and the housing crisis, it's finding specific outlier examples of people who, because no policy is perfect, who went to Harvard and majored in poetry and a bunch of other bullshit that will get the right wing fired up, who have this debt are being paid off, as opposed to what the average normal story about this is, which is someone trying to improve their lives for themselves and their family who are forced to pay for this outrageous cost of college and trying to keep up with that. And graduated from college in the middle of a recession, either in 2008 or just now in the pandemic one. And so, there's no question this will be weaponized against Biden for doing it. I think there's the other challenge is in not doing it. Biden won in part because through his climate plan and through people understanding the unique threat of Trumpism and Trump being reelected, young voters and young activists who were very skeptical of Biden in the primary engaged and did everything they possibly could to get him elected. And to walk away from this and to not take an opportunity to actually help people, that if you do believe you have that, has the risk of demobilizing the young voters who helped get Biden elected, and that we're going to need to hold on to the House and the Senate in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, the right wing, the bad faith right wing attacks on either action are going to be the same, whether Biden goes with 10,000 or 50,000. So then my question is, if you either have the authority to do it via executive action, or you can get it through Congress, I guess via budget reconciliation, because it's not getting through otherwise unless you get rid of the filibuster. And I imagine this is something, since it has to do with spending, that could be done through reconciliation, though we can double check on that. If you can get it done, you're going to get the same kind of attacks whether you go with 50 or 10. So why not help more people? Now, Biden's trying to make the point that I'd rather spend the money on early childhood education, and also it's important to make sure that anyone can go to free community college or free state college, public college, if your family's making under $125,000 a year, free community college for everyone, right? So ostensibly he's making the point there's a set pool of money, and if we're going to spend it on something, I'd rather spend it on 10,000 versus 50,000 and use the rest of the money for early childhood education and for making college affordable for other people who are trying to go. But then the question is there really some limited pool of money for this? In a world where, thankfully, Biden and the Democrats are much less afraid of the deficit than we all were back in the Obama administration. So I'm not sure that I understand Biden's reluctance to cancel $50,000 worth of debt as opposed to $10,000 worth of debt, both from a political standpoint or a substantive standpoint.
I guess the counter case would be, and I would be for cancel as much as you think you can, as much as possible, because it has a stimulative effect on the economy because it puts more money in people's pockets. It puts more money in the pockets in most cases here of the people who are the biggest consumers, right? You're putting in the course of that, the sort of essentially the core demo, if you will. But the one thing I will say is, and I am more guilty of this than most, is we say, well, they're going to attack you for 10,000, they're going to attack you for 50,000. What difference does it make? There is actually, when you dig into a lot of polling and message testing, yes, that is true in the initial attack, but the power of your response is somewhat mitigated by the numbers, right? Like it very well may be that in a back and forth, that is only 10,000 is better than 50,000, right? There at some point there's a case of diminishing returns, but it may be, and the Biden folks may know this, that 10,000, there is some sort of tipping point for people's view on this, and it's closer to 10,000, 50,000. I don't know the answer to that, but it's not. I don't think it's a guarantee that the politics are essentially the same between the two.
Yeah,
I think it is true when we're talking about
seems close to me.
Yeah, but I definitely think that's true when you get to numbers that people don't understand, that are too big for anyone to comprehend, right? It's 1.5 billion or 900 million, like that. I think is just sort of all the same. But 10,000, 50,000 are real numbers that people confront in their lives, in their paychecks, their bills, their mortgage payments, etc.
I will say, as a final point on this. This is the way that politics should work, right? Like, yep. It's good that Schumer and Warren and progressives are continuing to push Biden on this to go to 50,000, right? Like, he's saying no, he's saying 10. Everyone else is pushing 50. They should keep pushing him. And if he has, a good defense for it, he can push back. But I think he should do 50,000. You should, if you do too, you should keep pushing him on it.
It's actually comforting in how it's happening, right? The pressure is firm but respectful. It's not calling him corrupt or anything. It is making the case, and they are aggressively doing it. It is the more moderate Senate leader and then a progressive senator like Warren pushing. I think it is, and the best way to get it done is to really push hard on it. I think it's great. It should continue to happen.
So let's talk about the winter storm and freezing temperatures that have left millions without power and killed at least 20. The situation is particularly scary in Texas, which is facing the biggest blackouts at a time when temperatures hit 4 degrees Fahrenheit. It was colder in Dallas than Anchorage, Alaska. In Texas, no power. So the outages, which could last all week, happened for two main reasons. One, the demand for electricity surged to a level that the Texas power grid couldn't handle. And two, the supply of energy dropped because the frigid weather disrupted the state's sources of natural gas, coal, wind, nuclear, and solar power. People are freezing. Some don't have access to food or water. Some have died. And the poorest communities have been hit hardest. With one San Antonio resident telling the Texas Tribune, quote, "I understand we live in a less cared for neighborhood, but we're human like everyone else. What am I paying my taxes for?" Good question. So first, it would be great if everyone listening could help out people in Texas right now. The Texas Tribune has put together a list of local organizations you can donate to. We've all tweeted it out. Beto O'Rourke has been tweeting about it. You can also just go to texastribune.org to find it. We will tweet the link again. We'll put it in the show notes. Second, Dan, I want to get your reaction to how the Republicans who run Texas have responded to this crisis. Governor Greg Abbott attacked the Green New Deal. Rick Perry said that Texans would rather have more blackouts than have the federal government manage its outdated power grid. The mayor of Colorado City resigned after telling his constituents, quote, "No one owes you or your family anything. I'm sick and tired of people looking for a damn handout." And Ted Cruz, who tweeted this week that he has, quote, "no defense for mocking California's blackouts over the summer," hopped on a flight to Cancun to presumably film an episode of Insurrectionists Gone Wild. Flying Ted. I was laughing about Flying Ted, which Dave Weigel tweeted last night, all night long. Woke up in the middle of the night laughing about Flying Ted. Where would you like to start, Dan, on all of this? It's hard not to start with Ted Cruz. I guess we can start with Ted Cruz and then back into all the policy debates.
I do think that a number of our younger listeners are going to be interested in your Insurrectionists Gone Wild joke. Do a little Googling and be fucking horrified that there was a moment in time.
Don't Google.
That there was a moment in time when there was a large industry of selling incredibly misogynistic videotapes. Mail order videotapes. I mean, it fits with all of the coverage of of sort of the media culture of the 90s, from the Britney Spears documentary, et cetera.
I was just going to say, yeah, it is.
Anywho, Ted Cruz. What were you thinking?
So for those who weren't paying attention to how this story unfolded, it started on Twitter last night with some people like taking pictures of Ted Cruz in the airport. We weren't even sure at first if it was Ted Cruz. Then it sort of looked like him. Then it was the mask that he has used on the Senate floor. Then it looked like Heidi, his wife. Then it really looked like Ted Cruz because people took some more pictures of him on the plane. And then people did a little sleuthing, and then they found, because the reason that it was hard to believe is because no one could believe that he could be that fucking stupid. Like, everyone knows he's an asshole, but he's known as like a clever or a smart guy who's an asshole, right? No one thought he could be so stupid as to leave his constituents literally freezing so that he could hop on a fucking flight to Cancun. But Ted Cruz was that stupid. Ted Cruz was this, and he was that big of an asshole. And just as we're recording now, he put out a statement blaming his kids. Saying that his kids wanted to go on vacation. So he flew down there with his kids, and then he rebooked a flight home today after the controversy erupted.
Yes,
what an asshole.
Ted Cruz, just as big an asshole as you thought, but even dumber. I mean, for many politicians, this would be career-ending.
Yeah. No, I would say that. No, Ted Cruz is not up, of course, until 2024. So he's got 4 years, and there's obviously a lot of people are like, oh, everyone's going to forget by then, and it's 2024, and whatever, he'll get away with anything. Look, I get it. Like, it takes a couple hours for just about everything in politics to be memory hold, but I don't think it's going to be that hard to remember the time that Ted Cruz went to Cancun while his state was literally freezing to death. I just don't think it's going to be that hard to remember.
It is, as you sort of watch this play out over the last several hours, it is the difference between how this would be experienced by a Democrat and would be experienced by a Republican. The right-wing media is actually leaping to Cruz's defense And Dinesh D'Souza, just a horrendous person, said that Ted Cruz was doing Texas a favor by going to Mexico to get off the power grid and stop being a drain. Right?
Which then even that defense was shut down by someone tweeting that Ted Cruz had asked for a police escort once he got to the airport Wednesday to leave for Cancun. So he did take law enforcement resources away from the crisis so that he could fly to Cancun for a fucking vacation, which he blamed on his kids during a blackout where people were freezing to death. I can't get over it.
I was convinced that was not Ted Cruz, or that was him flying back to Texas from D.C. or flying back to
I did think that.
It seemed impossible to imagine that anyone could be this dumb. But kudos to you, Ted Cruz.
So the most common disinformation being spread on the right about the energy crisis right now is that renewable energy is to blame for the power outages, especially wind energy. Here's one of the more absurd takes from Tucker Carlson.
So, unbeknownst to most people, the Green New Deal came to Texas. The power grid in the state became totally reliant on windmills. Then it got cold and the windmills broke, because that's what happens in the Green New Deal. You're without power. Millions are still without power tonight. Several have died. Now, the same energy policies that have wrecked Texas this week are going nationwide. They're coming to your state.
Fucking asshole. Wow. What's wrong with Tucker's take, Dan?
Well, first, how is it possible that AOC, Ed Markey, and Joe Biden enacted the Green New Deal and we had no idea?
Yeah, it's a trial Green New Deal in Texas. They decided they passed the law, they forced it on Texas. No one else has it yet. No, I didn't realize that Greg Abbott and the Republican legislature in Texas and Ted Cruz and John Cornyn were all big Green New Deal fans. I didn't know that they had tried to implement it in their state. Who knew? There's bipartisanship right there.
I think it's probably worth getting into just like a little bit of detail about why this is so wrong, because this is one of those things that you're going to have to talk to your MAGA-loving uncle about any minute now.
I saw my mom over the weekend. She's like, just got a message from your aunt saying, "Oh, hope you're happy with all your wind energy. Look what it did." And I didn't even know the whole story yet. And I was like, why is she talking about wind energy? And then I started reading that. I was like, oh, okay, there we go. This is another conspiracy.
Yes. Okay, so let's explain why this is wrong. One, Green New Deal, not in law. Not a thing that has happened yet. So it is definitely not because of the Green New Deal. Number two, Texas only gets a fraction of its energy from wind. As of at least a few days ago, according to the Austin American Statesman, yes, it is true that half of Texas's wind turbines are down because of the weather. The other half are up and running, and the ones on the coast where it is warmer are actually generating above average amounts of energy. The primary reason that they're having the power outages is because of natural gas, not being hard to get natural gas energy during winter times, like unexpected winter weather like this. Number three, wind turbines work in the cold. Two of the places with some of the highest per capita wind turbines in the country, South Dakota and North Dakota. I don't know if you've ever been to the Dakotas, John, but it is cold as shit.
Yeah.
You can weatherize wind turbines. They did not do so in Texas, in part and in fairness, because this is a once-in-a-century event, cold event. But it can be done, and you can have your wind turbines work. They chose not to do that in Texas. That is what is happening here. It has nothing to do with wind energy. It has nothing to do with the Green New Deal. It has to do with the fact that Texas is facing a once-in-a-century cold spell that is preventing the access of fossil fuels to fuel the energy needs of the state at this time.
Yeah, if you look at a chart of which energy sources have been disrupted by this storm and how much, number one, by far, as you said, is natural gas. Number two is coal. So two fossil fuels are number one and number two, and then it's wind. The larger issue here is the grid has failed, right? The electric grid in Texas. And the reason it failed is because it was not ready for this kind of once-in-a-lifetime severe storm. And so, of course, the demand for electricity surged. People tried to heat their homes, which the grid wasn't ready for because people don't try to heat their homes like this to this level in February in Texas. And then all of these energy sources were frozen out because they were not weatherized, like you mentioned. So what is the solution to this? Because while this is we keep saying once in a century weather event in Texas, climate change, we know, is making extreme weather events, not just in Texas, but all over the country, much more frequent. And we do not have an energy infrastructure to deal with the effects of climate change, which are already upon us, as we are seeing every day. And so, like, I can't. All this discussion, Dan, about a new electric grid and building a smart electric grid. Did it bring you back to our days in the White House?
You mean the smart grid? How many times do you think he wrote a speech about the smart grid?
Barack Obama was obsessed with an infrastructure plan that would allow us to build a new, smarter energy grid that could transmit all of the renewable energy that our country is now creating, and that would sort of withstand weather disruptions like this, that would withstand outages, that it's smarter, that it's more efficient. And all of us smart political communications people would all roll our eyes when he talked about the smart grid, because we're like, no one knows what the fuck an electric grid is or a smart grid. It's going to be hard to explain to people. And Obama told us it was really important, and he was correct. And now, so let's talk about what President Biden can do. He's already declared a state of emergency in Texas, sent FEMA to provide generators and emergency supplies. But looking beyond the immediate crisis, he also has pretty ambitious climate and infrastructure plans. What in those plans could sort of help mitigate something like this from happening again?
Well, certainly updating our power grid and weatherizing it and updating our infrastructure writ large is going to have a huge part of this. This is a big part of his Build Back Better plan. There's a lot of reporting this week that the next item in his legislative agenda is the infrastructure plan. I think he met with union leaders earlier this week on that. And there is a climate mitigation piece which involves preparing for these once in a century events that we now know happen once every couple of years in some cases. And then there is also the continuing to update our energy infrastructure, which has lagged for decades. It is something we've been incapable of doing. Everyone's got to make a joke about Infrastructure Week under the Trump administration, but it has remained true that we have done nothing significant on a broad scale, non-stimulus related infrastructure plan in an incredibly long time.
Yeah. And so much of over the last several years when we've talked about climate change, it's about policies that will prevent climate change. Climate change is here, and a lot of the policies around climate change now, including a lot of Biden's policies, is around climate mitigation, climate resilience. It's fighting the climate change that's already here. And that you do primarily through, or one big way that you do that is through building the right infrastructure. I mean, the other thing that we should mention is Texas's power grid is its own power grid. It's not connected to other states like most other states are connected to each other. A national power grid that is smarter, that is built to carry renewable energy, could connect in a way that if one state had an outage because of a severe storm or severe weather event, there could be power stored in another state that could be transmitted to the state that's dealing with blackouts. So like that is the future that we could have if we invested sufficiently in our infrastructure, and specifically green, renewable energy friendly infrastructure, which is what Biden's plan would do.
Yeah, it seems. Could you imagine if we shipped energy from states that have extra energy to the states who need it in a very seamless way without upsetting the idea of Texas sovereignty?
I mean, it's wild. It's wild. Well, I'm sure the Green New Deal fans, Greg Abbott and Ted Cruz, will be on board with that. Congratulations on finding a way to make people hate you even more than they already do. Didn't think it was possible, but you know, he's an ambitious guy, so he did it. All right, everyone, have a good weekend. 2 quick housekeeping notes. Representative Gwen Moore of Wisconsin joined the Hysteria crew this week to talk about Republican legislators' attempts to suppress votes in Arizona and Georgia. So check that out. And over on the Crooked YouTube channel, I joined Alyssa Mastromonaco on her series Let's Break It Down to talk about how the State of the Union address was written in the Obama White House. Fond memories, Dan. Fond memories. Go to youtube.com/crookedmedia to hear all of our stories about the State of the Union. Check it out.